Student loans are a big problem for pharmacists. With graduates facing interest rates above 6%, it can be hard to get traction and make progress. If you're not pursuing the public service loan forgiveness program and you don't need income based repayments, refinancing can be a great move and can help save you big. Check out our refinance page at yourfinancialpharmacist.com/refinance, where you can calculate your savings and check your rate with one of our partner companies that are offering exclusive cash bonuses of up to $500 to the YFP community.
I feel like I have so many options. So for me, it just really does feel like freedom. It's freedom to choose, freedom to take advantage of whatever opportunity comes up.
You're listening to the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast, a show all about inspiring you, the pharmacy professional, on your path towards achieving financial freedom. Hi, I'm Tim Ulbrich, and on today's episode, I welcome John Kohli, a fellow alum and polar bear from Ohio Northern University, who currently resides in Arizona working as a PRN pharmacist at a psychiatric hospital after previously serving as a pharmacy director. We talk about his career journey, how he managed to rack up approximately $260,000 of debt despite graduating from pharmacy school with minimal student loan debt, what motivated him to get his financial house in order, and how he hustled to pay off most of this debt within a 2-year period. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. I'm excited to welcome John Kohli onto the show, a 2006 graduate of Ohio Northern University who has an incredible journey to share with our listeners that includes ups and downs financially and personally, and a journey of discovering his true identity and how that has impacted his finances. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tim. Glad to be here.
I appreciate your time. You know, here we are, Memorial Day weekend, 8 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. out in Arizona. So actually 5 a.m., right? Out in Arizona?
That's correct. Yes, bright and early.
Early morning. And I appreciate you take the time to talk with me and share your story with our listeners. I think, as I mentioned in the introduction, incredible journey that I know has been inspirational to me, and I'm sure will be the same for our listeners. So let's start with your education and training. Tell me a little bit about how you got into pharmacy and then your career path since graduating from Ohio Northern in 2006.
Well, absolutely. I was working in a pharmacy as a senior in high school, actually, a small, independently owned pharmacy in the small town where I grew up. And the pharmacist encouraged me to apply to her alma mater, which is Ohio Northern. And I decided this would be a great career choice. I packed my bags, moved to Ada, and spent the 6 years there. And after that was looking at maybe I should move to a warmer place in the winter. And I really liked the Southwest. So I found a residency out in Phoenix and decided to pack up my Honda Accord and drive on over to Phoenix, do a residency. And, the plans were to stay for a little bit and see how things went. And here I am almost, 13 years later.
Yeah.
Still here.
So growing up in Northeast Ohio, as I recall, correct?
That is correct.
So no wonder. I grew up in Buffalo. So no wonder you wanted to move out to Arizona. I mean, you spent time in Northeast Ohio. You spent time in Ada, Ohio, where the winds and the polar vortexes are readily there. So going out to the warmer weather certainly makes sense. So talk us through, you got to Arizona, you do residency with a compounding pharmacy at Midwestern University. Tell us then about the career path that leads up to your current role at the psychiatric hospital.
It's interesting. I'm glad that I did the residency out here in Arizona because I didn't know anybody but a friend of a friend from Ohio Northern who was also a student at Midwestern. So I came out here blind in terms of any friends or connections other than my job and that one loose connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up starting to be an assistant professor at Midwestern and also working still with that compounding pharmacy. And that is where my journey continued. And I met a lot of people through the state association, through residency. We had some residence groups. And then I ended up leaving the college and just working full time at the compounding pharmacy, although this specific one was more in terms of HIV specializing. So
Okay.
we helped patients there at that clinic. And it was about at that time that I really had what I call my spiritual and financial breakdown. And, my problems with addiction really
Mm.
came into play. And I had to take about a year to sort of take some time off
Mm-hmm.
from pharmacy and just work part-time. I worked in a grocery store setting in another small compounding pharmacy for a year or two, then bounced into a clinical pharmacy position with the prisons for a very brief moment, and then back into the grocery store. So at that time, it was figuring out, is this the right career for me? What do I want to do with my life? A lot of the financial
Mm-hmm.
realities were starting to hit there. So, there was a lot of questions about what am I doing? And it was during that time that I landed the director position at a psych hospital. And from there, spent about 3 to 4 years in that position. Also got into a PRN position at an acute care trauma hospital, and really built those connections in that aspect of pharmacy, and that's where I am today now.
And so before we get into, what you reference as your spiritual financial breakdown, knowing that's such a big part of your story, I want to talk about your strategy and debt position coming out of pharmacy school, because you really had a lower amount of student loan debt, significantly lower than is the average. So I've talked before with our listeners, also went to Ohio Northern University because of my lack of education and awareness and different factors. I came out with a little more than $200,000 of debt during my repayment journey, but you had a much lower amount, $60,000 to $70,000, which is about $100,000 less than the national average right now. So how were you able to graduate with a lower amount of debt than is the norm, especially coming out of a private institution?
Ohio Northern blessed me with some scholarship. So I already came in with some edu- academic scholarship,
Mm-hmm.
and also through there was an organization in the nearby small town, and they also helped with a portion of my student loan or student tuition, excuse me.
Sure.
And then I basically worked throughout my years at Ohio Northern. I worked during the summer full time and worked during the school year 10 to 20 hours a week from really freshman year
Mm-hmm.
until I graduated. So I paid some of that tuition and tried to minimize the amount of loan debt I had to incur.
So minimizing the amount that you need to borrow for cost of living and other things, scholarships. It sounds like from that, as well as the work experience. I'm just curious. Ada, as everybody knows, for those that don't know, it's literally in the middle of nowhere. So I get the summer work. You probably went home to Northeast Ohio. Well, where were you working like throughout the year? Like there's one pharmacy I think within like 10 miles.
Yes. Well, I had to drive the 10 or so miles to Lima, Ohio.
Okay.
And luckily, I met an alumnus in the Rite Aid Corporation. And
Mm-hmm.
I had done some college work as a senior in high school, and I was able to get my intern license the winter of my sophomore year.
Okay.
So actually, in December of that year, I started interning at Rite Aid in Lima, Ohio, and would drive there on the weekends, sometimes during the week, but almost every weekend. Sometimes I wish that I could be hanging out and enjoying the weekends off, but there was a lot of times I had to go into work.
A lot of hustle, and we're going to come back to that because that's very much your journey of paying off debt. It was a lot of hard work and hustle. You're giving me flashbacks, John. I remember sitting in the chapel at Ohio Northern in our professional pharmacy pop course, winter semester of the P2 year, applying for intern licenses. So I was back on campus recently talking with our students, and I was like, yeah, we had pop professional pharmacy in the chapel, and they looked at me like I was crazy because now they have like these nice facilities and buildings and all that. So good times and memories. So let's talk about what happened. I mean, we're going to talk in a minute about paying off $260,000 of debt, which was a variety of things: student loans, a mortgage, some credit card debt. But what happened from graduating in such a good financial position to really, in some sense, the wheels falling off and racking up a significant amount of debt after graduation? Where did that debt come from, and why was that the case?
Well, the biggest thing that happened was after I finished my residency and got that first real pharmacist salary, and I felt like I was rolling in dough. I mean, this is what I wanted. This is why I went to school for 6 years and seven, an extra year. And I bought a house here in Phoenix in the summer of 2006. And if anybody can remember, yes, you know exactly where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
Is by 2007, the fall of 2007, the stock market crashed and the housing market just tanked here in Phoenix. So I bought with an interest-only loan. I didn't put any money down, and I bought at the tip top of the market. And that was a significant, that was over $200,000 of debt right there in that property. And this was at the time when I had to start working part-time and wasn't full-time employed. So it was okay when times were good. I could pay that mortgage, but as soon as something unexpected happened and I didn't have that income and the market wasn't great, I was in a bind. And that's where I also racked up credit card debt and was just not able, would have been able to pay the mortgage, but also it was a burden.
So it sounds like several factors that came together that, the part-time work, since you're not working full-time, you mentioned interest-only loan, no money down, and all of a sudden the market takes a significant hit. And so you don't have that full-time income. Obviously you have some student loan debt, but that leads then, I'm assuming, to some credit card debt because of a lesser salary and the mortgage challenges that are going on. So give me the details on the home. I mean, obviously, what I know of Arizona and the financial crisis with the mortgage bubble being popped is they were hit probably harder than anybody else. I mean, maybe a couple other markets, but what did that actually look like number-wise for you, and how did that impact the rest of your plan?
Oh, yeah. So I bought in 2006 $233,000 as an interest-only, adjustable rate mortgage after a 10-year ARM, I think is what it was. And I ended up short selling that house in 2012 for about $72,000.
Wow.
So that is how bad it was here. And
wow.
And even after I sold, that definitely affected my credit and ability to purchase something else. So I was looking at trying to find something for cash, and you could find in those 2012, 2013, you could find condos here in Phoenix, nice 2-bedroom, 2-bath condos for under $50,000. So I was looking to pay cash for something, but I kept getting under contract and losing it, or there was bidding wars, and then the market just was out of my reach in terms of paying cash after that. And it was, now we're back up to where we were prior to the crash or the recession, or even higher than where we were.
It's really interesting just to hear you say, John, in such a short period of time, you went from, graduation, feeling like you're rolling in the dough, six-figure income, to all of a sudden, what was I would say, argue a very good position, only $60,000 to $70,000 student loan debt quickly turns into a lot of debt because of the mortgage position, credit card debt. You mentioned the car loan, of course, the student loan debt that didn't go away. But I think there's something to be learned for all of us there in terms of, especially when you're looking at those big purchases like a home, here we are again, right? 2019, super hot market here in Columbus. I think it's the number one market in the country right now. And I think it's easy to buy these homes. The doctor loans are readily available, nothing down, ARMs, all those types of things, interest only options. And for some people, they may be able to get away with that. Maybe the market doesn't crash next year, maybe it does. But really looking holistically at the rest of your financial plan to say, hey, if the market goes down 20% next year or 30% or 40%, what's my game plan, right? As I look at the rest of the plan. And I think that gets into a bias where we tend to look at things through the lens of today,
Yes.
assuming they're always going to stay the way that they are today.
When it's
And
sunny, everything looks great. And,
everything looks great.
When, like you said, what happens if the market crashes, or what happens if I lose my job, or some other unexpected thing happens?
Yeah.
What do we do?
You never know. That's exactly right. You never know what that may be. So I'm assuming, I want to come back to, you mentioned previously having a spiritual financial breakdown. And I have to assume all of this was going on at the same time when I just see the transition from where things started to where things ended up. And then obviously we'll talk about the recovery of that on the back end. So tell me more about this spiritual financial breakdown, as much as you're willing to share about where that came from and then how that played a part in eventually you turning the ship around.
Yeah, I just realized that, I had really liked my career and I liked pharmacy, but I think I was just putting too much emphasis on the career, the career being my identity. Like, it wasn't just I'm John who is a pharmacist. It was I'm John the pharmacist, and everything I did was based on this job, and also in the fact that I also wanted to make money, and that was the end of the goal. That was really it, was just in pursuing this goal of getting that degree or getting that salary. And in the once it happened, there really wasn't anything. It wasn't that fulfilling. It was, okay, now I'm done with it, and what do I do now? And I think that in really recognizing my addiction, I had to say, there's something missing here, and I need to find out what that is. And I think, pharmacy could allow me to have a life to find out what that is, but not be the end and only goal.
So much wisdom there, and I hope our listeners hear that, because I think that's true for many pharmacists. Addiction aside, is the identity that can come from career, something I struggle with, on a regular basis, and I think it's something that just constantly I'm hoping to challenge others to say, hey, at the end of all this, like, what's the point? Why does this matter? As you look back in 30 or 40 years, like, what is this really about? And I like what you said about, the career is certainly a big part of the overall picture, but I think if that becomes the sole identity, there's going to be a lot of disappointment for lots of different reasons. So where did that discovery process for you come from? Was that a part of you working through the addiction? You mentioned a spiritual component there. Where did you really pivot and say, okay, if it's not this is my true identity, this is what is my true identity? Where did you get the freedom to discover that?
It's been from just spiritual work, in looking at my, the things in my life that I've done, my character assets, my character liabilities, basically, forgiving myself for the mistakes I've made, and then also recognizing that I can have choices and I can choose what I want to do, and my actions have consequences, either positive or negative. So it really got, basically seeing everything crash down around me and recognizing that I'm still here, I'm okay. And I've got to take care, and I have a responsibility to take care of these things, but now I can deliberately make choices to basically put myself into a better option in the future. And that is my responsibility, and I can use that through my relationship with God, through other ways, not just through my job, but through other other things, through my church, through community
Hmm.
organizations, and my hobbies and interests, that it needs to all come together.
So let me build on that. And one of the things I often think about, probably too much, to be honest with you, is that I often think and try to picture a scenario where, I'm 75, 80 years old, if I am lucky enough to have the opportunity to live that long. My kids are grown and they're off, and my wife and I are reflecting back on life. And I try to think from those moments, from that moment, like as you look back, I try to think about, what are the things that would need to happen that I would say life well lived, and I would have peace with that. And I often worry and am somewhat anxious that I'm going to look back at that and say, wow, I spent a whole lot of time doing a whole lot of things that didn't really matter a whole lot in the scheme of this bigger picture. So for you, John, as you think about that scenario, like what are the things that you want to look back when you're 75, 80 years old and say, I'm so glad I did this, or I spent my time doing this? What are those things that are most important?
I think for me, it's helping my family, my parents. I want to make sure that their retirement and you know, their rest of their life is taken care of. I want to help my brother and sister, and then I want to help friends and other people that are in addiction. I want to be able to show them that there's a way out. And I think that, as much as, money is great, and having, great experiences, traveling and accomplishments, those are all great things. But I really think it's that relationships with the people that
Mm.
you love and other just people in general are going to be the most important things that I look back on.
One of the things I just thought of, John, is that the data would show that there's several people that are going to be listening to this podcast that may be struggling with some type of an addiction. Obviously, that can be in a variety of different things. And while there's not necessarily data to show this, I would argue there's many that are listening that are struggling with identity solely being tied up in career. If somebody is listening today and one of those two things resonates, what words of wisdom would you have for them?
Well, if it's addiction, there's many organizations to help with that. And, I would encourage, looking into, those types of areas. And if it's identity, you're really reflecting. And if you can take some time off, maybe, even if it's a couple of days, I mean, if you are blessed with being able to take a couple of weeks to just look at, what do you want, and find
Mm.
out what do you want. I've always had a bucket list of things that I wanted to do from, basically from college. It was 100 things. List 100 things that you want to accomplish before you die, because you got to start doing it now. And you know, maybe that's one way to start. To say what are some important things that you want to get done, and writing them down, and then taking a couple to start, and see what you need to do to do those things, because that's what I'm realizing, is that life is short. I am in my late 30s, but I feel that I still have a lot of time, but it's not
Yeah.
an endless amount of time.
Yeah, and I love your suggestion there of just taking time to stop and reflect, right? It's just so easy when life gets so busy to run week to week, month to month, year to year. And as I'm sure you do, we're still relatively, I guess, new graduates. I graduated in 2008, so 11 years ago. But I look back at that 11 years and I'm like, what the heck happened? Like that went extremely quick. And if you're not intentional about it, it can fly by. And I think often that can turn into a career without intention. So let's talk about the practicalities of how you did it, how you paid off $260,000 of debt, which was a combination of student loans, a second house mortgage after the first experience you had, some credit card debt. And while this was, of course, over a period of time, I know that you did most of this between January 2017 and January 2019. So that's a lot of money in a very short period of time. So talk us through how you did it, how you wrapped your arms around this incredible amount of debt, and what did this look like month by month for you to begin to knock this down and ultimately get it paid off?
Absolutely. It's hard to think, when we look at that, or you say that number, I'm like, wow, was it really that much? But I guess it was. And really it definitely felt when I was hustling the hardest, I kept praying. I was like, God, if this is the right thing for me to be doing, because, I was spending so many hours at work that, I was like, if this isn't, please, like, stop it. Like, I will, I
Mm,
was willing to do what it took and to be very intense in getting there. But at the same time, I, was kept asking and pausing to say, if this isn't right, show me the way to do it. But I guess it must have been right, because here I am. And and so I short sold that house, and I was working and saving money. I started budgeting after that short sale, and I started actually looking at my finances. I think that was the first and foremost thing, was actually knowing where my money was going and being deliberate about it, writing it out.
mm,
And that allowed me to save some money. I started with an emergency fund. I don't remember exactly how much it was, but
mhm.
maybe $10,000, and then it basically grew up to about $50,000, and I was looking for a place to buy with that, but it never worked out. So I just kind of kept saving it, started saving for retirement in my own, because I wasn't in a 401k or anything. So I just
Mhm.
put some stuff in a Roth IRA and bought some stocks in a mutual fund. And then I did get the full-time job. So I did start contributing to a 401k. And then I just really kept up with budgeting, kept up with saving as much as I could. And I was saving a pretty significant percentage. I was renting. I had a roommate at a certain time. So my expenses weren't that high. But then I finally did decide to buy another property, and I put down 20%. But then I had this mortgage over my head, and
Mm,
it stressed me out again, because I felt, that maybe there was a little bit of PTSD from my previous
sure.
experience, that, oh my gosh, what happens if something terrible happens? So I had that mortgage. Still had a little bit of student loan, but in 2017, January, I decided, you know what, I'm going to get intense, and I'm going to basically get rid of my credit cards. I finally paid those off, get rid of the other student loan, because I had the cash to pay for it. So I got rid of that student loan, even though it was such a low interest. I'm thinking, man, I could make so much more money in the stock market, but you know what? I'm going to get rid of this debt. And then it was, I'm going to get rid of this mortgage, because
Mm.
to have, I don't want to have any debt anymore. And there we go. And so that's where I picked up another job and basically just worked my tail off.
So no credit card debt, no student loan debt, no mortgage, no car payments. I mean, put that into words for me. What is that? What does that feel like? I mean, what is that sense of relief and freedom that you get being in the position you're in right now?
It just feels like I have options. It's the openness. I feel
Mm,
like, well, one, I'm serene, because I really do feel like I can handle whatever is thrown at me. Really, financially, I can handle whatever's thrown at me. I do feel even spiritually, I could handle whatever's thrown at me, but here I am in this, just, I feel very secure financially. And then
mhm.
from a kind of just a, I guess mentally, I feel like I have so many options. So that is just, for me, it just really does feel like freedom. It's freedom to choose, freedom to take advantage of whatever opportunity comes up. And it feels like it was worth it, even though at certain points in time during that process, I was doubting it or was
Sure.
unsure, but it definitely feels like it's worth it now.
Yeah, and I think freedom is the exact word that I think about when I hear your journey. I mean, whether it's freedom to take a year off to pursue something that you want, whether it's freedom to give in a radical way for something that you're passionate about, options, right? And that's really where you are right now. And I think certainly it's an incredible journey to hear where you started, where you went, and now where you've taken that into the future. So now that your debt is paid off, I mean, what is the plan? What are you doing with all of this extra money each and every month? Have you slowed down the hustle and the grind and the cutting of expenses, or have you kept that and are you reallocating that money in other directions?
Okay, so I definitely got pretty dramatic in my cutting of expenses during that time. I spent last summer with no air conditioning in Arizona through the summer.
Wow.
It wasn't that much, but in terms of money saved, but that was the commitment level that I was willing to do. I don't know if I'm ready to do that this year. I think I could probably spend, a couple $100s on the electric bill this summer just to
I think you
avoid,
could, yes.
yeah, just to avoid the extreme nature of that. But I still do save like 70, sometimes up to like 90% of my income now.
Wow.
And right now, I'm putting some away in like a retirement account, but most of it is going into just my savings because I eventually, I want to, maybe it's a business, maybe it's a rental property, but some other income, I want to buy some sort of asset to, you know, in the future. I don't know exactly what that is, but I know for me, it's, having the cash readily available when that option comes up is, to me, that's important. And still, still saving for retirement and having, investments in index funds, that is still an area that I'm focusing on. But I still am definitely extreme in my frugality. I still bike to work. I rarely go out to eat, but because I like cooking and I like making things for myself. But I think this year I'm going to probably get air conditioning.
So, it's interesting is I hear you talk about the journey paying off the debt, but as well as right now where you're saving, 70, 80, 90% of your income. Obviously, that tells me you have some system in place where you're tracking and accounting for expenses. So I'm assuming some type of a monthly budget. Can you talk us through what that looks like for you and how you manage that if you use any tools? I think that's a practical way that we might have somebody listening who says, hey, I've got $200,000 debt and I just don't know where to start. I don't know what to do here. So what does that look like for you on a month-to-month basis?
I have in my notes on my phone, I have a discretionary budget just in my notes, and I set aside a certain amount of money, and then whenever I spend it, I document it in my notes section. And then at the end of the month, I tally all of that up and make sure that it, works, what that dollar figure is works with what has been coming in terms of my income. And because I work sporadically, some paychecks are much higher than other paychecks. So, but I have an idea of what the income that's coming in is going to be. So as long as I'm keeping an eye on the whatever's coming in and what's going out, they, at the end of the month, they reconcile and I reconcile it. And I just always use cash if I can. I take a certain amount out of the bank, and that's what I use to buy things at the grocery store or whatever else I spend. And I don't have credit cards, so if my bank account doesn't have the money in it, it's not going to I can't buy it, essentially.
So it's a great example. There's a lot of varieties of budgets. We talk about a zero-based budget a lot on this podcast and on the blog and on the website. But what I'm hearing you say here is you essentially allocate X dollars per month for the discretionary, nice to have expenses. And you make sure you don't overspend that, but everything else you're allocating towards savings goals, or maybe it's giving or other types of goals. But you're trying to identify a certain percentage that you're just not going to overspend. And then knowing that. Okay, very cool. Yeah, I think that's a good way of doing it, and I think the message there, hopefully for our listeners, is there's not only one way to do budgeting, and I think finding a system and a process that works well for you to allow you to be on the path toward achieving your goals is really what is important. So, John, I want to again thank you for coming on the show, for your willingness to share your story. I look forward to following your journey, in terms of what you're going to do going forward, the impact you're going to have on the pharmacy community, the impact that you're going to have on those that may struggle with addiction or career identity, whether you're going to eventually invest in a business or real estate, other things, I think the future is really, really bright. And I look forward to following that journey and hopefully collaborating with you on some level going forward. And I thank you again for your time in coming on to the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast.
You're welcome, Tim. It's been a pleasure, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it.